Welcome to Tech Data's 30 Minutes with a Hacker. Thanks everyone for joining this next episode of 30 Minutes with a Hacker. This is Jade Witte with our Security Solutions Group, and I'm excited to have both Alex Ryals and Scott with us. Brett's been with us since we've been doing these podcasts for a couple of years, and we've been fortunate enough to have Alex with us kind of on a regular basis the last couple of months. Before we get into this, Brett, real quick, why don't you introduce yourself and Alex, and we'll take it from there.
Hi there, my name is Brett Scott. I am the founder of the National Cyber Warfare Foundation, and I've been on board with Tech Data for a little over 5 years now. I'm overseeing, in my capacity at Tech Data, I'm a director level overseeing the Tech Data cyber range, which is making a big difference out there in the industry.
Thank you, Brett. My name is Alex Ryals. I lead our global security practice here at Tech Data, which means I'm focused on all of our security vendor relationships, the solutions that we build, the services we design for our partner community as we go to market through the channel and make sure that partners can protect their customers.
Great. As we're kind of getting into this, something I love to do is kind of pick Brett's brain because he's, as an ethical hacker, he's very tied into kind of what's happening globally in cybersecurity and from the hacker perspective. And I think it'd be great, Brett, for you just to share a little bit of some updates on what you're seeing out there.
Certainly. It's been a crazy year and a half, 2 years. It continues to get a little wilder. What we're seeing now is a tremendous industry response to all the breaches and other things that have been going on. So if you haven't been watching, there are an awful lot of updates that you need to be applying to your systems right now. Tons and tons of updates across accounting systems, email systems, server systems, workstations, etc. There's quite a lot to do. So for those of you on the blue team, this is a great chance to get out there and patch and update because there's so much stuff that's been coming out. We have seen that bad guy groups that allegedly were going to go away seem to have come back to life with a different name and brand. Who would have thunk that people would voluntarily give up a $90 million, $100 million business? Oh, that's right. They don't do that. So anyway, they came back and they're now a different name now. So those people who get enraged can't search for the name and find all the other hacks that they've done in the past because they have a totally new name now. They're totally different people. I don't know. Maybe they're going to hack for good now. Probably not. But in any case, they are absolutely out there. They're very aggressive. We're going to see a big transition in targeting more of the systemic things. There's a greater yield for the hackers if they attack things like MSSPs or even MSPs. Anybody who is a service provider. We saw with Kaseya, for example, in this past month, that they went after Kaseya because they had thousands of customers globally. And so those are the kinds of things. If you are an organization that is responsible or caretakes for your customers and anything IT, anything security, it's a really good time to be paying close attention to your own systems. Beyond that, there's a really big shift that's been going on. I mean, we've had everybody working at work, everybody working from home, everybody doing hybrid now. And because of all of that shifting, there's been a tremendous amount of reconfiguration and adding and removing technologies from your system stacks. So because of that, this is a really great time to maybe reassess where you are to kind of see what you're up to and see what you've done and see what's working well and might need some more work. But I don't know. What do you think, Alex?
The market is absolutely challenged. The customers are confused on how they're supposed to protect themselves because as I read about all these network attacks we're seeing in the news, they're coming from every direction. Sometimes they're coming from the cloud. Sometimes they're coming from your inside your network. Sometimes they're coming through your identity and access system. And customers are really struggling with the right way to defend themselves or even test their defenses. I was actually at Black Hat security conference last week and DEF CON for that matter. And Black Hat was interesting. There were far fewer vendors than normal, but there was one vendor that I talked to while I was there that's developed some technology that actually tests the efficacy of your security products. So they will take all of your security tools you've bought and configured in your environment and stand them up in a virtual machine with some special drivers that isolate that environment. And then they drop real malware payloads on it to see how your security products and your business applications respond, which is a really interesting concept because we read all the marketing brochures from security vendors that says, oh, we'll protect you from ransomware, but do you really know that it's going to work? when it comes right down to it. And so this company has designed some tools to let you test that theory. If you want to know the name of the company, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and I'll be glad to share it. But all that plays into this concept that it's super important that we pen test and vulnerability assess our environments on a regular basis to make sure that our security products aren't having to hopefully do what we're paying them to do, right? And I think vulnerability assessments and pen tests are a great way that we get toward that state.
Let's dive into that a little bit more. I think this would be great for us to kind of dig in a little bit. And maybe Alex, you could define for us, or just kind of in simplistic terms, explain the differences between a vulnerability assessment and a pen test.
Yeah, it's a good topic, actually. I think there's a lot of confusion out there when I talk to partners and customers about vulnerability assessments and pen testing. Oftentimes see the terms misused, or a customer tries to pay for a pen test when what they really need is a vulnerability assessment. So let's talk about the difference. A vulnerability assessment, first of all, should always be done first. And it's basically the idea that we're using automated scanning tools to scan all of your servers, your network, and your business applications, trying to identify vulnerabilities. A vulnerability is something about that application or network configuration that is not right. It provides an opportunity for a bad guy to potentially exploit it and come inside. There's an interesting statistic that says that 85% of our network and security products are misconfigured to some level, and that's frightening. So what our vulnerability test does is it tries to identify those misconfigurations. It identifies products that aren't working the way they're supposed to, usually because of misconfiguration, but possibly other reasons. Maybe you don't have a particular security product to protect a particular workload in your network, and a vulnerability assessment could potentially find that way into the network, that way to escalate privileges. So a vulnerability assessment is super important to identify those potential vulnerabilities. There's actually a big database online called the CVE database, Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, that list all the known vulnerabilities in the market. Like as we identify vulnerabilities in products or in network devices or security appliances, all those get cataloged with CVE numbers. And these vulnerability tools, scanning tools, they will go use those known documented vulnerabilities and scan your environment to see if your network is deployed the version of firmware, the version of product that's actually susceptible to those vulnerabilities. And it produces this nice big report telling you what you need to go fix. The pen test is like a final exam. A pen test is where you hire an ethical hacker to actually come into your network and try to compromise it. So using a vulnerability, a pen tester will exploit or actually come inside. So imagine you have your house and you're walking around the house, the outside perimeter, trying to identify all the potential ways you might be able to get into that house. Well, you notice that a particular Windows lock is unlocked. You notice that the back door's lock is broken. You don't necessarily go inside yet, but you just catalog and write down in your piece of paper there all the different ways you might get in. A pen test is when you actually exploit that vulnerability and walk in the door or open that window and come inside. So I think of a pen test as like the final exam after a vulnerability assessment that does a lot of the work. So that's the difference in the two, or the definitions.
Brett, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, that's a great metaphor, Alex, because it helps people to understand what's going on, right? So when you're doing a vulnerability assessment, you're just taking a look at how things are going. You're looking for potential weaknesses. You're identifying them. But when you're ready to say, okay, I think we got it down, I think we're secure, you need somebody from the outside, a penetration tester, to go then assess that and say, yep, that door is actually locked, or nope, that door is still open. You can get into it. But for your team, right, your blue team, the people that are managing your security and updating your security posture, they need to get a chance to get ahead of this. When a penetration test is done, it raises the stakes for everybody. So all of a sudden, the blue team says, oh my gosh, there are these 50 things we got to fix right this minute. And so it becomes an emergency for them, and of course frustrates them. And needless to say, we've already had a tremendous amount of turnover in our staff. We don't need to exacerbate that. So by using vulnerability assessments, it allows your team to plan, execute, and get ready for a penetration test. And therefore, there's less drama, if you will, that goes along. It allows you to fix things without there being the stakes raised. Obviously, you need to do both. You need to do penetration tests frequently, but you can use vulnerability tests like they're candy, right? You can just simply do multiples of those to allow your team to adjust their systems and their configurations to get you in the right posture. And then when you really need to do the assessment to say, where are we? In fact, you're absolutely going to use a pen tester to do that. So the metaphor is observing the lock is open, actually checking the door to see if you can get in that door. So those two metaphors, vulnerability assessment looks, penetration test tests. And so that's a great metaphor, Alex.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other differences too between vulnerability and pen tests. And you pointed out correctly that you always need to do vulnerability assessments first, because you need to give the IT staff a fighting chance to find the problems and fix them before you hire the ethical hacker to come in and test how well they did, right? So you always do vulnerability before a pen test. As far as frequency, vulnerability assessments could be done as frequently as you wanted to, because largely, not completely, but largely they're automated. You have lots of different tools out there that can scan your environment and make sure that you are as secure as we know of with known vulnerabilities. You never know about 0 days. By definition, a 0 day is a vulnerability you don't know about, or an exploit that hasn't been released to the market yet. But at least for known vulnerabilities, you can make sure your environment's clean. A pen test generally would happen maybe twice a year, possibly 3 times a year. Some people do it quarterly. You always want to have different providers doing your vulnerability assessment and pen test, because you wouldn't want the same assessor to come do your pen test for all 4 times a year or 3 times a year. You want different people to come do it, because everybody does it slightly differently. Because while as a vulnerability assessment is largely automated with tools, a pen test is a combination of some automation and a lot of manual work. The best pen testers are highly skilled, and they can take a known vulnerability and try to exploit it to get inside the door in multiple different potential ways. So you wouldn't want to hire the same person to do it the same way all year long. You might want to bring in 2 different service providers to do your pen test, to do it, come at it from different perspectives. One may think more about your wireless environment. One may think more about your hardwired network environment, or one may think more about how to come in from your cloud workloads. So they all kind of have different specialties. There's no one human that's an expert in every area of security, except maybe Brett, of course. But for the layperson, we're going to need to have multiple people to have a good handle on all the pen testing opportunities. There's also a difference in the reporting you get back out of both of these things. A vulnerability assessment should deliver a massive report that has just a ton of information about all the known vulnerabilities that we found that your environment is susceptible to. And they'll give you information right out of the CVE database about the CVE number, what the vulnerability is, what you can do to mitigate it. And you turn that over to the IT team or the security team, and they now need to go work down that list and start correcting those issues. Whereas a pen test is usually a shorter report. It explains the vulnerabilities they chose to penetrate, to exploit, because you might have 100 vulnerabilities in your environment, but a pen tester may spend all of his time on 3 of them, because the goal is just to get in, because a hacker only needs one way in. He doesn't need 50, right? So a pen test is going to explain the vulnerabilities they exploited, how they got in, and then recommendations of what you might do to close the door so that they can't come in again. So there are definitely lots of differences between the two, but I hope the point that you're hearing from both Brett and I is that vulnerability assessments need to happen very frequently, and you need to do those regularly and do those first. Give the IT a fighting chance to fix the issues, and then bring in an ethical hacker to see how you did on the progress.
And now more than ever, Alex, I mean, again, all the shifting and all the changes to configurations, that's an amazingly scary statistic you gave us, with 85% of network devices and security devices being misconfigured. And that was pre all the shifting. And if you take into the fact all the factors that are with COVID and all the technology shifts that occurred there, and this employee migration that's going on, where you're gaining and losing expertise, all of that shifting landscape, makes now more than ever the time that you need to be conducting vulnerability assessments and penetration tests, just so you can reestablish some sanity into what you're doing.
There's one more thought that I had before we move on, and that is a lot of times customers will do a vulnerability assessment and have a massive list of all these vulnerabilities, and they think to themselves, I don't have the resources to go tackle all these vulnerabilities. So there becomes an exercise that's important to do, which is prioritizing the vulnerabilities in front of you to decide which one should I do first, which ones are the most impactful. And so when you're looking for a vulnerability assessor, make sure that they have some methodology to not only tell you what the vulnerabilities that your environment is vulnerable to, but which ones you should fix first in what order. So for instance, at Tech Data, we distribute a vendor that our partners can sell called Cyricon, and they have an ability to search the dark web looking for any chatter of anyone talking about building, buying, or selling malware that uses specific CVEs, common vulnerabilities and exposures, or vulnerabilities. So if we run the list of all vulnerabilities found in an environment against this Cyricon database, we can prioritize which ones are bad guys actually exploiting. The truth is, out of all known vulnerabilities in the market, hackers only exploit less than 3% of them. So the big question is that every customer wants to know is, which 3% do I need to really care about? And the answer is, we're not going to know exactly, but we can certainly have some tricks like Cyricon, who looks in the dark web at the malware that's actually being sold and looks at the descriptions that list the vulnerabilities that they tend to exploit. And those certainly should go toward the higher end of the priority list, of course, right? So just think about how to prioritize your vulnerabilities, because no one has enough resources to solve every possible vulnerability in every environment.
I know there's different types of both vulnerability assessments and pen tests. Let's dive in a little bit further and maybe cover the different types of each of those.
Yeah. So, when it comes to doing vulnerability assessments, you're not going to use automation for a penetration test because robots don't do that yet, right? But you will use them for vulnerability assessments. And almost everyone is going to use some software that will automatically scan their systems and look for vulnerabilities. And so there are multiple options available there, but there also you could use a junior pen tester to conduct your vulnerability assessment. So that's essentially a manual version of that vulnerability assessment. And what's neat about that is, again, the junior pen tester is a human that thinks like a human. So they might hone in on certain things or certain systems and might do more work than might be done by an automated scanner. So you're gaining value by doing a manual one, but let's not cheapen the fact that automated scanners are great for just getting you a general read on what's going on in your networks. But maybe, Alex, we could talk about some of the commercial providers that are out there for these things. I can tell you on the open source side of things, there's OpenVAS, which uses the OpenSCAP database, but there are great commercial solutions available to conduct these things.
Yeah, certainly. I think I found most vulnerability assessors tend to use a lot of open source tools for this. You mentioned OpenVAS. Some of the commercial tools like Tenable Nessus are good. There's other tools out there like NetSparker. There's Nmap, which is probably the most common tool used for pen testing and vulnerability assessment, because it can do a scan of your network and try to identify what applications are running on what ports on your computers and systems. AirCrack is a great tool to try to scan your wireless network and figure out what's going on there. Microsoft actually has a fairly new tool called Baseline Security Analyzer that's really good for scanning, especially your Microsoft environments, for known vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, as an example. That's just a few of the tools that are out there for vulnerability assessments.
Yep, there's also Metasploitable, right? That's another great tool from Rapid7.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that was vulnerability assessments. Let's look at the types of pen testing and the tools that we're seeing out there for those.
Yeah, I'll take that. I think there's, generally speaking, we think of three different types of pen tests. There's white box pen testing, black box, and gray box. And the difference in those is largely in speed, efficiency, and coverage of the network and the environment you're testing. So where like a white box pen test is where you have gone and communicated with the company. As an ethical hacker, you would communicate with your customer who's hiring you, and you agree on the IP address range you're going to cover in the test. the list of applications that you're going to target. There's probably you have a network diagram, like you're given a bunch of information about the environment so that you can design tests that are very intentional about testing all the different areas of the network, so that the customer has some good, happy feeling that they're in good shape. Whereas a black box test is when you're basically acting like a real hacker who comes in blind. So you're not given any information about IP address ranges. You don't know the network architecture. You don't know what business applications they run. You basically have to do your own reconnaissance on the network. You do your own scanning with tools like we just talked about a minute ago. And then you identify how to get in, and you find a vulnerability and you exploit it and come in the door. Black box is usually faster, to be honest, because your goal is just to get inside, and there's always a way to do that. Whereas white box, you have a lot more information and you're generally testing a lot more things because you have specific IP address ranges you're told to test. Black box, you're not given anything. So as long as you get in the door, you're done. Capture the flag's over. Gray box is a bit of a hybrid. So in a gray box, you're given a segment of the network, possibly a subset of IP addresses, maybe to start with the goal that you're exploiting and trying to discover additional areas of compromise inside of a network or environment. So gray box is, think of it as you're given a 10-second head start in the race, but you're not given all the tricks on how to run the race. So they all three of them have, I would say, different speeds to complete. They have different efficiency levels in terms of the tools you're going to use and how easy it's going to be for the hacker, the ethical hacker, and they cover different amounts of the network. So at the end of a black box, you're not going to really feel like you have found all the ways to exploit the environment, just the one or two that they found. Whereas white box, it's probably a little bit more thorough typically. Brett, you have anything to add to the white box, black box, gray box?
Absolutely. So we should talk about progression, right? So when an organization, a company is thinking about where we're going to best spend our money on a penetration test, I would say that you're going to go start with white box tests, move to gray box tests, and then finalize with black box tests, right? The white box test is going to allow you to define the landscape, look for all the things that the bad guys might find. Again, you're getting a more thorough result and a more broad result. The gray box is going to be an advancement on top of that, where essentially you're having, you're saying to the bad guys, come visit my house, right? And they're going to come in, look, if they're going to try to do stuff, etc. And then the black box is going to represent what risks you have in the real world, but also more importantly, it's going to hone in on exactly what the bad guys out there in the world are going to hone in on. So you're going to have a progression. You're going to start doing white box penetration tests. You're going to move to gray box penetration tests, and then when you're through several of those, you're going to be ready to start doing black box tests.
If you look in cyberstate.org, there's a huge shortage of people with skills in cybersecurity. I think there's 144,000 openings from April of 2020 to March of 2021, and an additional 300,000 openings. So there's this huge skills gap. And I know that people maybe want to get into becoming a tester and learning that skill. So how do you guys propose someone approach this if they have the interest and desire in getting into cybersecurity in this way?
I'll take that. So the statistics that are out there right now are not reflecting the massive shift that's going on. So in November of 2020, a study came out that said that 85% of the blue teamers, the people protecting your networks, were considering leaving the industry. And I can tell you, I have a bunch of different friends who used to be cyber people that are no longer cyber people. They just said, you know what, I'm done with that, I'm out. And so we've had that skills gap has grown tremendously. But then let's also talk about the fact that when those blue teamers leave your organization, who trains the new people? And because you have less expertise to train the new people, they have at least a longer ramp. It's going to be much more difficult for them. So needless to say, it's probably never been as bad as it is right now to try to defend and protect your company and your organization from the bad things that are happening out there. And there are a lot of them. It just continues to scale up. So while the problems are getting worse, our troops are retreating, right? So because of that problem, something needs to be done to fix that quickly. And so we just launched the Passage program at Tech Data. So what that is, we are helping to train and upskill folks, and we have 1% talent, so we have the ability to truly assess the capability of a candidate for a particular job position. So what we're doing is we have our pipeline, if you will, of vetted and competent cyber warrior training entities. That's both the Tech Data Cyber Range, but it's also educational partners. You know, we're getting a few sources, right? We will then measure each candidate towards a job position. And so if somebody wants to be a junior pen tester, if somebody wants to be a SOC analyst, we will measure their skills and identify any gaps that that particular candidate has. The Tech Data Cyber Range will then upgrade that person's skill set to where the point that they will meet the criteria to do that particular job. And we will then put them through a capstone project, and then we will actually put them into a real world on the job environment for doing their final assessment, which includes, by the way, soft skills, right? So your people that are coming to you through the Passage program are competent cyber warriors whose skill sets have been measured and assessed by 1% level talent. In other words, people who would know the difference. And then ultimately we have vetted those people so that we know that they can do the job because we've observed them doing that. So what companies get, those people who hire candidates out of the Passage program, is job ready personnel, validated job ready personnel that can get started and be working for your organization and be effective for your organization from day one.
Yeah, I would add to that. We're really excited about the Passages program. I think there's a great opportunity for us to almost finish off and polish off a lot of great people out there who are trying to gain cyber skills. And there's lots of ways to get skills in cybersecurity by going through various training programs out in the market. The question is, how do we give them hands-on experience and really test whether they understood and can execute these tools that we've talked about, you know, Metasploit and Wireshark and Hashcat and John the Ripper. There's so many tools out there used for these, for vulnerability assessments and pen testing. And it's important that we make sure that the people out there taking classes from many of the different industries, cert organizations out there actually can come bring it all together, practice it. We assess their skills, and we give them real world projects, and then we help place them into customers, and we work with several placing firms to help people find jobs. So it's a really exciting program, and we take people from many different levels of security knowledge, from fairly novice who need a lot of training, all the way through people who already have some of their certifications, but maybe haven't been able to get a job just yet. So there's a lot of certifications on the market when it comes to pen testing and vulnerability assessments as well. Like EC Council offers the Certified Ethical Hacker certification. Offensive Security offers the Offensive Security Certified Professional, OSCP cert. But do those things really mean that you've had a practical hands-on experience? And sometimes employers want to know that you've been tested and proven to actually have knowledge. And that's one thing our Passages program does for the employer community, which is really exciting. We're really excited about how this program has progressed.
You know, our ISAO, Information Sharing and Analysis Organization, just started a data sharing collaboration with the CompTIA ISAO, and CompTIA, of course, is another certifying authority, and the ISAO is separate from that, but CompTIA also offers a great number of certifications. What we're doing on the tech data side of things is we're bringing all of that together. We are leveling the playing field, measuring and assessing both hard skills, the hands-on skills, as well as soft skills, such that the companies that are smart enough to go find their candidates with the Tech Data Passage program are getting a quality of candidate probably unlike what they've ever experienced.
And with that, we probably should wrap this up because we're at the 30-minute mark. This was really great. Thank you both, Brett and Alex, for being on this and sharing your insights. I know it's an exciting time to be in cybersecurity, and if you want to make the investment in yourself, there's a huge need and demand for people with these skills. So can't think of a hotter place in the IT industry than in cybersecurity. So making that investment in yourself, I think, will really pay off. Look forward to next month's podcast on 30 Minutes with a Hacker. Thanks, everybody, for joining.